Welcome to the 27th edition of Stump the Pastor. Our question today comes from Mark in Fort Collins, Colorado. He asks, does it do any good to pray for something that has already happened, but you don't yet know the outcome? Well, Mark is a pastor, and I am sure that, like all pastors, he has people that come to him with questions about prayer, because I certainly have people over the years do that as well. And Mark gives us one example of why prayer is so misunderstood, I believe. I know that my own understanding of prayer, for example, has really evolved over the years. It's changed dramatically from what I grew up with. You see, my first experience with prayer was the bedtime prayer my mother taught my brothers and sister and I when we were very, very young. And I was praying that prayer every night long before I had any idea what the words meant. Prayer was something you did because influential people in your life told you to pray. So it would be much later in life, actually, that I figured out that the prayer I was praying as a child, which was supposed to be a comfort, was really asking me to pray about my own death. And please, God, keep me in your care if it does happen. And this prayer was being done right before the lights went out and I would be alone in the dark. Well, the saving grace for me was that I had learned that prayer by rote. And I had no idea until I was much older what I was saying. In fact, there was one word that I never really knew until I finally got the nerve to ask my mom. The word was "Fashadai." It was actually, if I should die. When I asked my mom about that, and she told me what the real phrase was, I remember a shudder going up my young spine when that prayer then became clear. I didn't use it anymore. Now, many Christians use prayer as an insurance policy or a manipulation of God's intent, or as a polling contest. You get enough people to pray, then you can convince God to act on something. So Mark's question to us today asks us to consider prayer's intent. In other words, is the purpose of prayer how I get God to come around to my point of view? So here's where I land on these kinds of questions now. And I know this is going to be hard for some of you to hear. Unlike is commonly said, I don't think prayer changes things. Prayer changes me. I can try to use prayer as a magical incantation, but it isn't. I can try to use prayer to change the mind of God. It doesn't. I can try to use prayer to make sure God is paying attention. I have no control over who God pays attention to. And while we're talking about it, I have never understood the term prayer warriors. Like God needs to be convinced that because we want something and we have enough people praying it, it must happen. That doesn't make sense to me. For me, prayer is about me. I know that sounds selfish, but hear me out. When I care enough to pray for someone or something, I am mirroring God's grace. The more that I intentionally and genuinely care, the more like God's grace I am becoming. So when I pray for you, it isn't to convince God. God doesn't need convincing to care about you. When I pray for you, it is because I care about you. You are important to me. When I pray for our world, it isn't because I care, but because I can make anything happen in the world. I pray because I care about what is happening in our world. When I pray about systemic oppression, it is because I care about that some people are being brutalized simply for the color of their skin, or who they love, or about the amount of money they have or don't have in their bank account. And the thing is that the more I care, the more likely I will align my life and efforts to be an agent of God's grace, and as a result, an agent of change. So prayer isn't a magic wand for the people I name in prayer. Prayer is me learning how to care more so that what I do in my world makes this whole world a better place for all of us. So to respond directly to Mark's question, does it matter? Yes, it matters to pray for something even if the outcome has already been resolved, because prayer doesn't change outcomes. Prayer changes me. And when you pray, it changes you as well. See you next time. Stump the Pastor. Well, that was just one of your questions, Mark. You sent me a bunch, and I'll get to the rest of them later on. But if any of the rest of you have questions, send them to me. My email address is on the bottom of your screen. See you next time on Stump the Pastor.